Welcome to Truth and Justice with Vivian King. I want to welcome everybody in our visiting audience. Let me get my tie straight right here. We are excited about tonight's show. We got a special guest tonight. We're going to engage in real talk conversation, real issues, get around the criminal justice system. Issues are surrounding our neighborhoods. We're going to cover things in the political arena today, but we're also going to target the climate of the black male in athletics, and also the criminal justice system. The Citizen Project Research and Advocacy Reform put out a report here recently, and they say while the future of the national criminal justice policy is uncertain as we transition under this new president's agenda and administration, the Citizen Project believes an important foundation for reform has already been laid out that will be difficult to undo. The latest report says that highlights include sentencing. Lawmakers have scaled back mandatory sentence policies in 4 states, meaning things are moving forward. Collateral consequences. Also, here locally, reforming felony drug offenses. Here recently, Harris County has introduced legislation that if you get caught with small amounts of marijuana, instead of going directly to jail, they're going to give you a ticket or a citation. So even up under the new administration, we do see some reform in our criminal justice system. But tonight, our guest is going to bring us up to date on some of the things and topics that he's studied as a professor at the University of Houston. So I'm going to get a turn over and introduce to Dr. Brown. Dr. Drew Brown is here with us tonight. He's a leading scholar in the area of race, gender, and sport. He is currently African American Study visiting scholar at the University of Houston. Prior to that, he taught at Temple University in Philadelphia, and Dr. Brown also has been a professional football player. But what I'm excited about having Dr. Brown here tonight is his studies has covered a wide range of topics surrounding the culture and existence of African American people, both continental and locally. So, Dr. Brown, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me here. This is great.
Well,
Appreciate it.
I'm excited to have you here. And one of the first questions I had when I met you, and you told me you was a professional football player, and you was also a professor at the college.
Yes.
And studies show 1 out of 3 adults, especially black males, end up in prison. How did they didn't catch you and they called me? You know what I'm saying?
Right.
You know, not to put you in the box that I'm in, you know, because I'm a formerly incarcerated returning citizen. Yeah. But I was very intrigued and very excited and very proud to look like in a mirror at another black man and say, hey, they didn't get him.
Yeah, well, I just want to say, kudos to you. I think there's so many brothers that end up returning to prison, these reoffenders and whatnot. And the fact that, you say you're formerly incarcerated, and the former, I think, is important to note. But for me, it's not like I didn't have any sort of access to any sort of illegal activity. A lot of my friends were involved in illegal activity. A lot of people around me in my neighborhood were involved with illegal activity. So the thing for me was that I had a great opportunity. And that's one of the things that I think is important for young brothers specifically, is creating opportunities so they have something to lose. And I knew at one point I had something to lose, and that was my football scholarship, my opportunity to education. I always knew that a great education was going to lead to a great job. That's what I thought anyway. And so I didn't want to risk all that and jeopardize that. And that's really what kept me from the different things around me in my environment. But I certainly had access to it.
Well, let me invite my mentor, my boss, my friend into the conversation, who I'm very proud to sit at the table with, Vivian King.
Well, this is different for you to invite me, but thank you, Danny. Thank you, Danny. Thank you. I'm sorry I'm late. You know, I'm now a proud member of the Harris County District Attorney's Office. I am proud to be Kim Ogg's Chief of Staff. And we just had the experience of speaking to women in the Village of Mothers. The Village of Mothers, all mothers, it was at least 10 of them, mothers of murdered children. And they have not found justice for their parents, for their kids. And so, you know, I couldn't leave them. So Kim Ogg and I were talking to them, and you'd be proud to know that they were Black mothers who formed an organization, and a 5013C, and Vincent and Elkins helped them, a big law firm here, so that they can try to seek justice for their children. So Kim Ogg was explaining to them what legislative changes needed to happen, since the legislature is in session right now, because a lot of them, if their children were killed by police officers, whether rightly or wrongly, just say the officer was in hot pursuit of someone and he kills the wrong person accidentally, you're not under Texas law defined as a crime victim by definition. And none of these parents today their children weren't killed by police officers, but she was just explaining to them what to do. They're frustrated because the officers are not calling them back. They don't know what's going on with the status of their cases. And so don't you think it's a wonderful thing when the Harris County DA's office, who's only been in office for a month and a half, sets up a meeting with them, come in and ask me to sit there and we go through their kids' cases that the police have not
taken the time to do.
Right. And investigated. And we talked to them. I got all of their kids' information. I know I've been crying today, so I'm sorry. And so I'm still a little teary-eyed because I ran over here from that, and it's so heart-wrenching. Some of them broke down really badly today. They even had to have people speak for them, that we're going to be the conduit between our new HPD police chief, Art Acevedo, who Kim knows that we're working really well with him, and Ed Gonzalez, you know, a new Democrat that's there in office. And I'm going to be their conduit to find out the status of their kids' cases. Kim used to be the head of Crime Stoppers many years ago. So she's going to see if some of them, because they're suspects, you know, like on the ground, people are talking about it. And so we're going to see if we can she's going to use her influence to get Crime Stoppers behind it to give rewards on some of those. So isn't that a beautiful thing? So I just wanted to say that we're working hard for you in the community.
Right.
And I'm so glad that Kim, and Kim commended them because she said Black mothers usually don't do that. Don't form a group. And so she was really proud of them, and she was there to teach them how to get justice. Because we don't get involved until the cops have completed the investigation and referred it to the DA's office. We have nothing to do with the investigation. So I'm sorry I digressed that way, but I just want the community to know that we're trying.
Well, yeah, this is a great bit, because this is what I learned from you, that Washington, D.C. and what's going on the Hill doesn't govern what happens to my life in Houston, Texas. The people in place here, from downtown to our local leaders, judges, affect more of my life than the president of this country. You taught me that. But I digress, and we go to
now
Dr.
we get
Brown.
to Dr. Brown. That's what we're here for tonight, Dr. Brown. So it's nice to meet you. I'm Vivian King. I'm a lawyer and proud that you're here on the show. I do this as my community service so we can tell people stories.
Yeah, I think this is important, and thank you so much for having me.
Sure.
I've actually met with that group of mothers during a play at the University of Houston put on by the local high school, and I too have talked to them, and I think that such courageous women to be able to come out and speak to something that's been so traumatic to them. I look at when we have veterans that go through traumatic experiences overseas in war by seeing their friends killed and whatnot. But we have people here in our own community that see their family members and friends killed, and there's not a lot of support for that type of trauma, but it's trauma nonetheless. And I think it's very important that we establish organizations such as this mothers group to help handle some of that trauma, because we certainly need it.
They can do it together, because police officers are not equipped to be social workers, you know what I mean? And they need compassion. So, but there can be a way that maybe their secretaries or somebody can let them know that it's still cold. Any leads you give us, we'll go to. But I can understand the police officers don't always know what to say. I mean, but we still have grieving mothers that feel like they're taxpayers too, and they want to be heard. So it's interesting. So anyway, so tell you know, Danny's told me everything about you, and I know I'm a little late, but tell me, just keep going. I'm reading about you. I know you're from Canada.
That's interesting.
I am. And what's interesting about that is a lot of people say that there isn't racism in Canada and there's not an issue of race in
They
Canada.
love black people in Canada.
Right. You know, I just read an article. I just read the headline, so I didn't read the whole article, but it said that Drake didn't feel racism until he came to America. And I find that very interesting because I felt racism all the time growing up in Canada in my youth. And so a lot of times the difference is that in Canada, a lot of it goes covertly. A lot of it is strictly systemic, institutionalized. Black people disproportionately make up a large percent of the prison population, the unemployment population, the population in poverty, right? They suffer from lower education. Right, and so there certainly is racism in Canada. I came over here and people are like, oh man, it must have been great growing up in Canada. The racism isn't as overt as it is here at times, but it certainly exists over there, and I certainly experienced it. But growing up in Canada, I'm from a place called Windsor, Ontario, and it's a border city. It's right on the border of Detroit, Michigan, so we're like a 5-minute car ride that separates our downtowns by a bridge. So I'm super Americanized, if you will. I spent a lot of my time hanging out in Detroit. A lot of my friends and even family members are from Detroit. All of our radio stations, television stations are American stations. So in my border city, we were real Americanized through these different media sources, if you will, and our access to the border. So that makes me a little bit different in culture than from those from Toronto or Quebec or northern parts of Canada.
Right. Very interesting. The only thing I know about Canada is taking my daughter skiing twice. So from 8 to 16, every spring break, we'd go skiing. So we'd pick Montana or all the places in Utah, all the places in Colorado. But we did go to the 2 different places that most people go, Whistler and Banff. Yeah. So, that's all I know about Canada.
And I actually learned how to snowboard at Whistler.
Okay.
And I lived in Calgary for a little bit, so I did some snowboarding at Banff as well. 2 beautiful places. I mean, the scenery there, and I come from, the Midwest where the ground is very flat for miles. And, to go there and to be standing on top of the mountain looking down into the clouds, surreal.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing. But another interesting place in America, if you ever get to go skiing there, is Montana. It's different from Colorado and Utah. Montana is very, very different. It's like the Wild Wild West. It's very different. So if you ever get to go to Montana skiing, you need to do that. So I'm intrigued with your background. Okay, Canadian football. I know y'all were talking about that when I walked in, and but then you got to Clark, Atlanta. So
yeah. So when I was growing up in high school, I went to a high school called Herman, W.F. Herman High School, and athletically, it is by far, I think, the best high school in Canada. For athletics. We had a lot of players just off of my team for the years that I played that got American scholarships, scholarships to Division I, Division I AA, and even Division II schools for football,
now,
basketball.
I'm sorry to interrupt, is that based on where you lived, or do you go there because of your athleticism?
Well, that's the thing, is that, yes, it is based on where you live, right? You go to the local high school, but a lot of our athletes came from all over the city because our school was looked at as a school that was just a good open environment for those that do come from impoverished backgrounds, those that are blacks. We had a lot of disproportionately a lot of blacks in our high school compared to the other high schools. But we also had a lot of whites that come from poverty that really were part of our groups and whatnot. So we had a good, diverse crowd, but our basketball team, even in Windsor, Ontario, was 80% black.
Wow.
Right? And so we had a lot of athletic stars. A lot of my very best friends came to the States on football, basketball scholarships. But the thing about it is that from there, we created a pact, and we saw a lot of the people that came before us that had opportunities but didn't take advantage of them. That me and my friends, we sort of had this pact that if we get the opportunity to go away on scholarship, if we had the opportunity to go to a Division I school or to play athletics somewhere else, that we were going to take it. And we actually did that. There was 4 of us just in my graduation year, that went away on Division I scholarships.
Wow, that's a lot.
Right? It is a lot for a small school in Windsor, Ontario.
Right.
Right.
That's
Can
wonderful.
I add something to the conversation when he said that they made a pact? When I was coming up in high school, and it's not too long ago, we saw great athletes go to college in the following summer they were on a school, back in our neighborhoods, drinking a beer. And these guys were awesome, and we wondered, like, what happened to him? And year after year, nobody was making it to the NFL or graduating from college. So when we got to that level, like you, we were saying, like, how do we avoid being the great athlete that ends up back in the neighborhood? My choice was, it was such a high rate of failure, I opted out to the military. Because I had a small scholarship to a junior college, but I realized something. I wasn't going to do right, Vivian.
You knew that, huh?
I knew that about me. I could be honest with myself and say, I'm going to smoke weed and chase women, and I'm going to get caught up. I'm not going to go down there and influence them. They're going to influence me. And I was just saying, I just didn't want to see that play out. That's why I opted out of the military, and I digress back to you, Dr. Brown.
You know, that's a story of a lot of people that if you're not athletically talented, but you don't want to end up in the streets, you don't want to be slanging, you don't want to be hustling, then what do? And for a lot of black folks, I'm not saying that a lot of black folks don't go to the military for all of the all of the reasons of patriotism, but a lot of people go to the military because it's the only option outside of the streets. If you don't have athletic talent and you don't see other opportunities available to you, the military is one of those things that is not necessarily a choice, but it's something to sort of settle in terms of opportunities. And we see that so often. Like I said, I'm not saying that there aren't people that go there because they certainly want to serve their country, and God bless them, because we certainly need a military. But for black people in black communities, a lot of times it's the only option, and that's why a lot of them go.
That is really true. So tell me about U of H. So tell me what you do there. I know y'all might have been talking about that already. I might have missed it.
No,
but,
you.
Tell me what your how did you get to Houston?
You asked me before about Clark Atlanta.
Okay.
Clark Atlanta was a great opportunity. I went on a football scholarship to Lafayette College in Easton, Pennsylvania. It's about an hour and a half outside of Philadelphia, and it was a great experience. But it was also a predominantly white institution. I say it was an extremely white institution, and it was. There was only a small percentage of black folks, roughly about 3, and most of those were football players. So I went from that and continued on, played some football, and came back to the States and attended Clark Atlanta University, an HBCU in Atlanta. Right, the black Mecca.
Right, right. So then that one was probably a 97% black and 3% white, right? You went from one extreme to the other.
Exactly. You know, I would joke with people that I would go whole days without seeing a white person, right? Especially
in Atlanta, or because
in Atlanta, because I was on campus. Okay. And then I remember one white student that attended the campus. He was the only one, right? And so, but being
I bet he felt. Were y'all nice to him?
I loved it. So. He loved it. He loved it.
Okay, you're good. Okay, I'm just.
Yeah. But no. Being in Atlanta, you know, around the campus, it was predominantly black. On campus, it was mostly all black. You have Morehouse there, Spelman there at the time, Morris Brown, Intertheological Center. So it was really an all black academic environment, which is great. It was amazing seeing that. But what I found about Clark Atlanta was that it's so diverse. It's probably one of the most diverse academic spaces that I've ever seen. If you can just get past the idea of we're all the same race, we're different in terms of economic class, religion, sexuality, ideology, geographical origins. There's so many people from all over the country and all over the world that come there. We're so different in so many ways that when you get there, we really, yes, we see race, but we see all the other differences of black people that get us to understand that we're not monolithic by any means. Oh, yeah. We're so different in so many different ways. It was beautiful being there. But I was there. I majored in.
You added to the cultural diversity.
I did.
From Canada.
For real.
I did. And I did have a fear that I wasn't going to necessarily stand out like I did before. But when I went there, it was the same thing. I work hard. I'm very friendly and I love to have conversation with folks. Very gregarious. And so I certainly did stand out there. But also, I majored in African American Studies. And I had a great professor, Daniel Amatoso Black. And he's a great novelist right now, has a fabulous book called Perfect Peace. And he really took me under his wing, both academically, spiritually, and emotionally, right? Raising me to be an honorable man. And he was the one that really developed me or allowed me to develop myself in a way that I'm so proud of. And that's really what I try to do with athletes now. I was the black male athlete, and so I understand what a lot of them go through, what a lot of them think, and how they think in their environment. But it took someone else to grab me and say, not everything is like this. Not everything should be approached this way, right?
And what was his job? What was his job that he taught you that? Well, how did you interact with him? Was he your teacher? Was he your counselor? Tell me about that.
He was. He was a faculty member, a professor in African American Studies, and now he's a tenured professor there at Clark Atlanta, also at Morehouse. He teaches English and African American Studies, and he's a novelist.
Okay.
So, and
But why did you interact with him?
He was my professor,
Okay.
so I had him for a number of courses, and he also has a community that he sort of helped cultivate or develop. It's a rites of passage community called Ndugu Nzinga, and what they did is they want to develop youth, specifically black people in general, not just youth, black people in general, to master master good character, not just
Wow.
having good character, but mastering it. And so really accepting people as they are and loving them, but developing them to master good character. And that's really what he did for me.
Wow, that's powerful.
It is.
I've never heard that before.
Right.
I mean, you hear it for high school kids like rites of passage, but not just for college kids or
Right.
college adults.
Right. But understand that if you didn't get the things that you should be getting from a rites of passage sort of ritual, if you didn't get that sort of development in your youth, in your early 20s, when you're 30 years old, that doesn't make a difference. You still don't have it. Right. And you still
that's
need
what's
it.
so needed in this society, because since so many people now are raised by grandmothers or foster situations because their parents have been on drugs or absent, it's a lot more of that now than even when I was young. You don't have anybody to teach you things. I was raised, as you know, in a very last 4 years of my high school foster family. And there's still things at my age, at 58, I still have never gotten. I've never been taught it. And it's difficult to have female relationships because all of my girlfriends expect for me to have the same experience that they do. And you know me. You know I'm not like a normal girl. Yeah. It's not I don't know that until I have that interaction with girls and they're like, but you should have acted this way. Or they get mad at me for acting that way, but I don't know any other way to act because I've never seen anything else. And so it's interesting about that. But I noticed that with a lot of our men. So he worked with me for a couple of years ministering to people in jail who were my clients because I started aging out. I couldn't relate to them anymore. They couldn't relate to me. Well, I could as like their grandmother.
No, not no grandmother.
Or mother. Okay, all right. Their old mother. But but Danny, having been to prison 3 times,
Really?
I could step out of the room and he could go at them. You know what I mean? And they didn't have to worry about me or trying to impress me.
Right.
I'm your lawyer. I'm not your girlfriend. I'm not your mother. But at some point I needed someone who could relate to them and teach them how to be men. And I realized they needed a lot of life skill. I had a client once before you start working with me that said, Miss King, I robbed because my kids needed hamburgers. Never realizing that, and no one had ever told him, well, you could make $100 stretch because you could go buy a bag of beans, you could buy a bag of rice, you can cook it, make it taste different ways, you can make spaghetti a lot of different ways. He thought you had to spend, $50 at McDonald's every night to feed his family. You know what I mean? He's never even learned how to stretch $1. He never knew how to cook basic little things, that you could do. And he just told me, I had a good young client one time, he said, I just don't know how to live.
Vivian, because I got goosebumps when you was talking about that experience I had with some of your clients. Now, Dr. Brown, these men are young men, and the one was young at 17 years old. He was in school, and when I went in and I met him, he looked like the kid from Kid and Play, bright-skinned, tall,
high top
fade.
And just as green as he could be.
And he's 17, they bring him in, they got him shackled.
Because it's capital murder. He's
in there for capital murder. And, and one of the things I asked him, like, why you went at home playing PlayStation? You got to go to school tomorrow. How did you end up in that situation when you should have been playing PlayStation and getting ready for school tomorrow, the next day? And he looked at me like this here, and he said, I thought you was here to help me. He was like he wanted me to say something different, but that was speaking to him real. This situation that you're in is not your life, but it's your situation. And I don't know if it changed him, but it definitely changed me, because it was like looking in the mirror and seeing that I can't judge him, because I've been to prison 3 times and spent 26 years on parole. But I'm here now trying to look in his soul and see something in it that tell him there's no reason to be afraid. The only thing you have to deal with while you're here is fear, and that's not real. And once you get past the fear, you'll be okay. I digress.
Yeah. But I think that's an important point, is fear. And for a lot of young brothers, right, especially when we're talking about black young brothers, they've seen the bottom. They've experienced the bottom. They've been in close proximity to the bottom, so they know what that feels like. And so then the objective is do whatever it takes, not even knowing what it takes, right? Having a certain understanding of things you see in the streets, but not having enough education, life experience to really navigate such a hard environment, right? But knowing that you don't want to be down at the bottom. You don't want to be there much longer or go down there, right? And so for that, what do we tell young kids that age, 17 years old, that don't know how to navigate that space but are forced to anyway? What do you tell them? I think that there's a lot of people that always tell me, if I was in that situation, I would do this. If I was in this situation, I would do that. Well, if you were in that situation, you wouldn't have the wherewithal that you have to do those things, right? And so I think that we really have to better understand, and with the work that you're doing it and you're good at it because you understand, right? And I think it's the same thing for me. When I deal with black male athletes, my words have a little more legitimacy, and I own that privilege because I've been where they are. I've been in their shoes, right? And I've navigated that space, right? And so it allows me to work with them in a way where they're receptive, and I know some of the issues that they're dealing with, and so I can sort of anticipate some of these things and help them through it. And the same thing with you and people that are in the position that you used to be in.
You know, are you familiar with this name, Dexter Manley?
No, I'm not.
You,
Of
Dexter
course.
Manley? You do?
Well, he's an ex-pro football player that got in trouble a lot.
He was a great football player. He played for the Washington Redskins. During his time, he was one of the best players in the NFL. So one day, I'm on vacation in prison, and
Don't call it vacation, because somebody might get the wrong idea that you liked being there. You know you didn't.
You were on timeout.
I was on timeout. I was taking a break from life. In comes this guy, this huge guy, comes in the day room. And immediately everybody say, Dexter Manley. And I had an opportunity to sit down and talk to Dexter. And it was like I was doing an interview before interviews, like I was here. And I talked to him, and I tried to drain everything I could out of him. And I was always intrigued. Dexter, man, you was a multi-millionaire. You know, explain to me how it happened to you. And he basically said the same way it happened to you, Dan. Drugs, crack cocaine, is a destructive force, and it doesn't discriminate. And I'll just, because Dexter's not here to defend himself, but I did reach out to him because he's not here in Houston locally now, because I want to bring him on the show if I can reach out to him.
Yes, that'd be great.
And reconnect to that. I remember you, even though if you don't remember me. And we met up under some stressful circumstances.
Yeah, but we have to understand too that when we're dealing with the National Football League, we're dealing with football players in general, there is a wealth of football players. There is a large pool of black male football players in the world, in the country. Some of them are going to end up in prison. And I think that we can't overgeneralize or inflate the sort of small percentage of football players that end up in that position. There are going to be some, with a big pool of football players that we have here in America and former football players, there are going to be some that end up in jail and addicted to crack and all of these things, just like you're going to get some white males on Wall Street, some white women that are housewives. We're going to get these numbers from all different groups of people, right? Some of them are going to end up in jail. Some of them are going to end up addicted to drugs. We can't overgeneralize and say that that's the stigma that we're going to put on black male athletes, because those are the ones we see in the paper all the time. And the media would have us to believe that, though. the media would have us to believe that, that some of the people on Wall Street, the executives on Wall Street, don't have drug addictions and don't end up in prison. But they certainly do, right? Just like we'll have some in the NFL that end up there too.
That's a good point.
It's a very good point. Tell us another good point. What's another burning topic?
Sure.
I think I'm still at Clark, Atlanta. I don't think we've made it to Houston yet.
So Clark Atlanta was great. I was an assistant football coach. I helped with the football program there, and then I went to Temple University to do my PhD in African American Studies. And Temple University, got to give a shout out to them. They're the first African American Studies program to offer PhDs.
Oh, wow.
Right, in the entire country and in the entire world. And so when I went there, I was involved with football and whatnot. I became more involved in academics, so I took on the role of an academic advisor for the football team. And so I was working right with a lot of the football players. So I had firsthand experience on what they were doing academically, right, as well as sort of in general life. A lot of them were close to me. A lot of them still even play in the NFL. And I'm, in contact with them, constant contact with them now. So I really understand what a lot of them are going through. I've helped a lot of them. Even some of them now will call me and ask me, what can they do to get back to school? What can they do to finish? What can they do to get into grad school, right? And I help every single one of them out the best that I can. I'm here for them, and I think that the reason why I'm so adamant in being here for them is because they don't have very many people that are, right? When they step off the field, there's not a lot of people that are cheering for them, right? When they step off the field, it's not only are there not a lot of people cheering for them, there's not a lot of people that even understand what they're doing when they walk into a classroom, right? When they walk into a graduate program, when they go to fill out graduate applications, right? They don't have a lot of people helping them do those things. And I certainly, being in the position that I'm in, understand it, because I had to do it, and so I want to help them do it. I remember when I was at home and I was filling out grad school applications, and I sent them off. And I'm like, so what do I do now? Do I got to wait for them to actually accept me? Because when I was in undergrad, I got a scholarship, right?
Right.
They knew what my grades were. They knew, they came to get me. I was like, Martin, they called me, right? But now I'm applying to them, and I have to sit here and wait to see if I'm accepted. It was a weird feeling.
Right. First time you'd experienced that.
Right. And so now I want to make sure that I'm there to help them through that as well, because they need that.
Good for you. Good for you. So you're still not in Houston yet in your story.
So
you're in Temple. You're at Temple.
Yeah. So I went to Temple, and then from Temple, I did my dissertation. My dissertation looked at Black NFL prospects and their conceptions of manhood.
That's a good topic.
Right.
I knew it was going to be good. That was going to be the next question. What was your dissertation in? So I'm glad you went there. So.
And also looked at their ideas of NFL players. Tried to draw some correlations, which I did. My study found that Black NFL prospects, they consider, or the characteristics that they associate with manhood. One is financial stability, right? Well, we kind of assumed that. The other one is strength, right? Strength, but in a way, both mental and physical strength, which is interesting though, because when talking about it, being strong, being able to overcome obstacles and things like that, yes, they talked about strength, but one thing they did not talk about was necessarily intelligence. They talk about psychological strength, overcoming obstacles, but they didn't talk about intelligence, right? Understanding what to do when. They just talked about strength, mental strength, and then of course physical strength. The final one they talked about was independence, being able to do whatever you want, whenever you want. But these same characteristics are the characteristics that they described in NFL players. The only difference is they described these characteristics as hyper-expressions of these characteristics. So it wasn't just being strong. They looked at NFL players as being the strongest in the world and overcoming mass obstacles. When it came to independence, football players don't even have to respect the law. They get away with things. And then when it comes to financial stability, football players are just rich. So it's these extreme forms. Well, we have to understand the history of that. Black people in America, a lot of black males, they feel as though they've been alienated from manhood for certain social reasons and social illnesses and racism and things like that. They've been alienated from manhood. So to prove their manhood, they prove it by exhibiting hyper expressions of manliness. Well, the NFL is an ideal place then, because it has that. So what I found in my studies is that for a lot of these Black NFL prospects, their desire to reach the NFL is associated with or wrapped in an extreme desire to reach manhood.
Wow.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Wow. So when you get those studies, can you help people with that? I mean, you have the data, the information. What do you do with it besides defend your dissertation?
Sure. So we see these, and more studies are coming. I'm continuously looking at studies, looking at how coaches talk to black players in their development, their association with other people in the school. There's tons of studies that need to be done to further understand some of these issues of black men and their pursuit, specifically black male athletes, and their pursuit of manhood, because we have to understand what manhood is. Manhood is a certain level of achievement, right? Of maturity in thought, in practice, and there's benefits to it. At one time, you couldn't vote if you were not a man, considered a man. You couldn't hold property if you're not a man, right? So it's really considered of being fully human, right? And that's what the prestige of being a man is. So to reach that, people go through a lot just to be considered a man or consider themselves a man. So what do? We make sure that we're putting things in place so that our black males can reach these requirements, right? Put things in place, put opportunities in their path so that they can achieve things that would have them feeling like a man, right? In ways that's healthy, and healthy specifically for our communities.
That's very interesting. So when they're football players, they feel like men, they're very strong, they're at the top of the food chain. Are there any programs for them to learn to be in normal society? Like, is there like a decompression stage or a matriculation down or whatever? I know that's up, but I'm just wondering, are there programs for athletes to learn how to be in society?
See, you should do that study.
I don't know. I'm just curious because it sounds like they need to. Well, believe it or not, I know you can't tell by looking at me now, but I was a cheerleader in college at the University of Houston when we used to have something called the Southwest Conference. So that's when all the great schools around here, I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Yes, very, very familiar.
Okay, well, and I went to college from 76 to 80 at the University of Houston. I graduated in 80 with a degree in accounting. And so back then we had, it was actually before Phi Slama Jama, but with football, we went to the Cotton Bowl 3 of the 4 years I was there.
Yes.
And so my first year there, Wilson Whitley won the Lombardi Award. He's been deceased many, many years now. But we also went to the Cotton Bowl. We played Notre Dame at the Cotton Bowl. And so I knew those athletes, okay?
You dated them.
Well, I didn't date them, but I was friends with them. The interesting thing about the 70s
You the
was
cheerleader, you didn't date the
No, I
players?
didn't. One football player my senior year took me to a dance. Took me to a dance, but it wasn't really dating.
Okay.
But I attract stalkers, so I had a football player stalker when I first got there, so that's a different story. But anyway, that's a different story for a different day. But anyway, but the interesting thing was we had a different dynamics because they really just let blacks in the 60s. We were there in the 70s, so it was still a lot of kind of racial tension. And it was either people that were like 5% of their class or athletes. Blacks in 5% of their class in high school, valedictorians or athletes. So it wasn't many of us, and we had to stick together as friends in classes. We helped the athletes study. We helped them pass, So we were kind of like a group that was fighting the man, you know what I mean? We were still kind of protesting things. And so it really wasn't a dating situation. Actually, most football players back then still dated their high school sweethearts. And they ended up marrying them. That was a different culture then, because they came from little country towns like Diboll and Lufkin.
You don't want to leave nobody behind.
So they still had their girlfriends from home. A lot of them really, it's a different kind of athlete now than the 70s, just put it that way. And because we ran the Veer, many of them didn't go into the pros, and it was hard to get into the pros in the 70s. But they were great athletes. But I watched how on top of their world they were, with all the women loving them, black or white, it didn't matter. And then after they either didn't go pro or they got drafted and they just made it one season, how a lot of them almost had nervous breakdowns, and most of them are dead now. They're not there. They had car wrecks, they ended up living with girls. They never really learned how to live in society because they were so used to being star athletes in high school, having the track records, the football records, college, and then the disappointment of the pros in the 70s and 80s. It wasn't like it is now.
Yeah, one of the major issues right now is how do we get football players to successfully transition out of football?
That was the word I was looking for. Transition.
Right.
They need some transitional communities or something.
But this is sort of the work that I'm very interested in doing, right? how do we get specifically focusing on black male athletes to successfully transition out of athletics? One of the big things that I looked at when doing some of these studies is that a lot of athletes take on what's called an athletic identity, right? And sports culture really imposes this on a lot of athletes.
Because the football, I mean, the taxi squad, the guys who are the alums, I mean, they are just on top of the world.
Yeah.
I mean, they treated like kings, and this is the first time they've ever been treated like this, and the last time for most of them.
Sure. And so this black identity that they have isn't necessarily getting them applause at the same degree as this athletic identity. It's not allowing them access to certain spaces like this athletic identity is. And so for a lot of them, they would rather be the athlete than to be the black person. Right? And so what they do is they prioritize their overall identity around this athletic identity. There's a Crystal Beeman out of Texas A&M, Arlington. She has a study that says that 70% of black student athletes say that their identity overall is made up, 75% of it is made up of an athletic identity. So you got to think, 75% of your identity is made up of an athletic identity. When athletic leaves your life, you basically go through an identity crisis because all your athletic identity then leaves.
You have some PTSD problems.
Right. And so what happens is...
It's definitely an identity crisis. It's a form, I guess, of PTSD, but it's because they've never been socialized normally, because especially for the athlete now, that's different from then. Then they were just country and strong and athletic. Now, they didn't have a lot of those. What do they have? Those AIU or whatever they did. I mean, they're like breeding athletes now. They started
sponsoring them.
I mean, they're doing it in high school. I mean, in junior high school and high school, and then they have these leagues they're playing in the off season, and then they're going to those camps, those combines. They didn't have those when I,
and that's part
and so they're like breeding them. It's like breeding little dogs or tag dogs. It's like, because I mean, the guys still had other lives back then. They identified with that because that was a cool identity. But then they did identify black because they would study with the girls because we were helping them get the grades. You know what I mean? So they still kind of stayed kind of grounded a little balanced. But after that, I noticed after we left, it was all athletics.
But we have to understand too that while the institutions have taken full advantage of black athletes, our communities didn't understand the value of athletics at that time. So they didn't inundate them with grand ideas of becoming pro athletes. A lot of black families didn't even know if they wanted their kids going away to college to play ball.
Right.
Exactly.
They had to beg them. They had to beg the parents and give the parents cars and give the parents things to let their kids come to college. They did back in those days.
But now, a lot of parents, they force them to play basketball and football. Right? They fill their heads with these grand ideas at a very early age to kind of live life through them vicariously, right?
But it's a different world.
Sure, but when we're talking about this athletic identity, they go through what's called identity foreclosure, where they refuse to develop any other identity other than this athletic identity. Sports culture encourages a lot of this. So the problem is when athletics leave their life, what do? They go through some depression, drug abuse, alcohol abuse. They're unprepared in terms of skills to do and have jobs outside of athletics, so they don't have really the means to support themselves. What a lot of athletes end up doing is committing crimes or getting involved with crime because it's the only way that they're going to be able to sort of make a living or gain resources to feed themselves and possibly their children. This is what, and obviously they end up in jail, a lot of them. This is what I call the playing field to prison pipeline, right? It's a way that we look at how athletics has dominated their lives in ways that they're not able to develop skills and end up having to rely on illegal activity in order to make a living.
Can I pivot and do an apples and oranges comparison? It sounds like you're describing what happens when we leave the military.
Military. That sounds like I hear all the military people say the exact same thing.
Because when I was in the military, it was a sense of entitlement to where I'm proud of this identity. When I go home, you have to travel in your uniform. You know that, right? So when you travel, you got your uniform on, and for a minute, I'm not black. For just a minute, when I got that uniform on, I walked through airports, I'm not a black man. I'm a soldier in the United States Army. When I go back home to my neighborhoods and I go down to the basketball court, I wear my fatigues. And I go down there, and just like the guy that comes home from college, that's a great athlete, that gets all the questions asked to him, I'm getting asked the questions. Danny, should I go in? What is it like? Oh yeah, my chest is poked out. You know what I'm saying? I'm in good shape because I'm in, we exercising. So that transition from being an athlete to a soldier, now I have this still to have this facade of an identity that I'm identifying with not who I am, but what I do. I digress.
No, that's actually a good comparison.
That's a great point. That's a great comparison. And so what I found is that a lot of black males that are in athletics, they use athletics to reach these gender goals, gender identity goals, right, of becoming a man. But athletics isn't the only industry where this happens. This also happens in the military, right? It also happens even in the hip hop industry, right? They have these images of people who are doing these things, who are hyper aggressive on the mic, got all this money, right? They're very independent, right? And so that's an industry where they want to get in because that allows them to reach these requirements that they have of manhood, right? But it's almost like, you're absolutely right. They forget that they're black sometimes, right? But a lot of athletes and entertainers, like you're entertainers, right? And we oftentimes push black people into entertainment to be the entertainers, and then when all of these sort of fans, majority of the fans are white, are applauding them, they forget that they're black. It's like the Lil Wayne. So there's no racism. I have all these white people cheering for me when I come out on stage, right? That's like Bojangles saying when I tap dance, I forget that I'm black because these white people are throwing money at me. Well, hold on. The fact that you're this entertainer, right? The fact that so many people in our community are encouraged or only see images like themselves in entertainment is a problem, right? And just because a lot of people are applauding them, because a lot of black folks and white folks are applauding them, does not mean that they're in a certain privileged position when it comes to race, right? They're still black, and they suffer from a lot of things, or our community suffer from a lot of things, issues in that. We can have a lot of athletes. We can have a lot of entertainers, hip hop artists and singers and whatnot. We can have a lot of these people come from our communities. But the fact that we don't have more doctors, the fact that we don't have more things in other areas of society.
PhDs like you, Dr. Brown.
Right, is a major issue. When you look at the statistics of PhDs, black PhDs in the country, it's atrocious. There's only a small percentage of black PhDs. I think it's like 2% of all PhD holders are black. But even in still, only 30 or 35% of that are males. Black males. Wow. So we're dealing with a very small group here of black males that earn PhDs. The question is why is that? Well, part of it is that there are so many images inundating our communities of folks that have a very, of professionals that people have a very small chance of becoming, of being a star rapper. Very slim chance to being a star rapper. Professional athlete. Out of high school, only 2% of the high school players, 3% of the high school players go to college. And out of the college players, only 2% of those go pro. So out of high school, you really have only like a 0.6% chance of going pro.
They did let us know that. Like they say,
who let you know?
When I was playing sports, they gave us the odds and statistics of how hard it was to go from being great high school players and making it to the NFL.
Was that discouraging to you, or was it did you just accept that as life?
Being self-aware, a baby boomer that I was, I always had an insightful look at life. Like, if it's only 1 out of 200 of us get Division I scholarships, and then the number from those even higher going to the NFL, it's just said it could happen to me. It's just I wasn't going to put all...
You didn't want it that badly.
I didn't want to put all my eggs in that one dream of this is what's going to be at the end of of my journey.
Because I think there are just a few percentage that just say, well, I'm going to be that one. It's like the person that goes to the Olympics, but it's not that many.
But that's what sports culture does, right? If you look at the commercials say LeBron James commercial, they say I couldn't do this. They say I wasn't supposed to be that, right? But here I am. Well, there's some little kid that's about 5'5", that wants to play in the NBA.
Right.
And he's in his senior year of high school thinking, they said I couldn't go.
Right.
They said I couldn't make it.
Right.
Well, 99.9% of you are not going to make it.
Right.
So you should probably have a backup plan,
Plan
or
B.
a plan B. Not saying give up, But I'm
Right.
saying let's do both simultaneously. It's almost like putting all our eggs in one basket is like training to win the lottery. I'm going to study number selections, right? Even though I only have a 1 in a million chance I'm gonna win. I'm gonna not even do schoolwork. I'm just going to study selection of numbers. As ridiculous as it sounds, is as ridiculous as it sounds to put all your eggs in one basket of athletics.
Right.
'Cause
Because you could be
there's-
the best in the world and have an injury.
Sure. And then let's understand, 70% of athletes, professional football players specifically, 70% of them end up broke 3 years after they leave the league.
Wow.
So let's do the math on this.
And they're making an astronomical amount
Right,
of money
but-
compared to 30 years ago.
But let's do the math on age. At 23, you graduate college, really, right, to go pro. The average career span of a player is 3 years. So that brings you to 26. 3 years later, most of them are broke. You have to find something else to do to make a living before you're 30 for about, even the ones that make it. So even if you add ones that make it and the ones that don't make it, for about 99.7% of all athletes have to find something else to do to make a living before they're 30.
Wow. So, and where's the transition for that?
And where is the transition?
Well, the
right?
NFL should fund that, really. I mean, just like they, had a big push on them funding the retirements
And the
or
brain
the places for them to
injuries. They just
the brain
got a big-
injuries now, but there was a big pushback from the 80s and 90s to have something for them, like a place to live or somebody to help, like little nonprofits, I think, to help them get medical treatment and things like that. Even before they started studying the brain injury, there was concern about their transition.
Sure, but some people would say that at that point you should have already had these things. So do we put the onus on the colleges? Well, in college they do everything they can, so they say, do everything they can to give opportunity for athletes to gain an education, right? But opportunity isn't a lot if people don't have the training or aren't prepared to enter into college. So now the onus drops down to the high schools, right? So really, there's onus all along the way that people should be doing stuff to help these folks in their transition, whether they make it or not, whether they get the scholarship or not, whether they make it to the pros or not. We need to do more to help athletes because eventually they're going to need to transition.
I wish that it was more help with the agents. I wish that the agents had a better I know they have a lot of financial people with them, but I wish that they had, almost like a criminal lawyer there so they would know what they can and cannot do. I wish they had like a better team for them and a transition awaiting, because even if they finish at 26, if they had the right mindset that they were going to have to go finish college then or find a real trade then, if they were kind of getting their minds ready for that, if that was part of the whole package with an agent, it would be great.
But what the problem with that is, I tell you, sports culture is something that certainly deserves more attention, because it is almost like these athletes are being, I don't want to say tricked, but they're being psychologically trained to view things with an athletic mind, which says, regardless of what else is going on, focus on one thing, winning. Right? And in their career, focus on making it to college, making it to the pros, being the best football player, basketball player, or track athlete that you can be. And as long as you do that, you'll continue to succeed. You'll continue to make it. You'll win championships and push with all of your might psychologically and in terms of your time and development on that, which means you don't have time for anything else.
Right.
And while they should be preparing themselves in other ways, and a lot of them do, don't get me wrong and say that, but
They're doing a
I think
better
that,
job.
that when looking at the issues of it, we have to understand that sports mentality tells them to focus 100% on this. I remember one coach said to a player one time that he was almost a straight A student, he had like a 3.7
Wow,
GPA.
a football player?
Yeah, this brother was great. He said, if you put more time into film and sport and football and less time in those books, you'd be on your way to the NFL. I couldn't believe my ears. I could not
The coach
believe
told
my
him
ears.
that?
The coach told him that. I
Wow.
couldn't believe my ears. Right?
Wow.
And the reason why is the coach, of course, coaches benefit when athletes are better. Coaches benefit when athletes play better, right? Not a lot of coaches benefit when an athlete goes from a 3.7 to a 3.9. Right? Not a lot of coaches benefit. That doesn't put more money on the coach's salary. It doesn't put more food on the coach's table. But what it does is it sets that kid up for a brighter future. Right?
How did that kid turn out?
It was great. He was an engineering student, which is wild, because engineering student and a Division I athlete. I mean, the student turned out great. I know he was involved in tons of organizational things. He was the leader of some of these organizations. So although I don't keep in touch with him now, I'm sure he's doing fine.
I bet. Believe it or not, this hour has gone fast. We have 2 minutes. So I will, Danny, say something, and then we will close with Dr. Brown.
Well, again, I want to give Vivian, you kudos and for creating a platform that allow us in Black History Month to come in and talk about issues surrounding urban communities. And we're not just saying that it's all about Black, but we see this group of people marginalized and affected more than any other group. And so it's great having you here, and I keep surrounding myself around great people. And when I walk in a room, if I'm quiet, nobody don't know. They may think I had a PhD.
All right. All right.
I want to say one thing is that we dealt with a lot of issues, and there are a lot of issues to go around, and a lot of things need to be improved. But we have to understand too that there are some brilliant Black male athletes out there. One of my very, very, very close friends graduated from Stanford along with some other folks and doing wonderful things. He was in pre-med when he was at Stanford. There's some other folks I was just talking to, like Chris Draft, who is doing some amazing things around cancer and whatnot. Some brilliant brothers, some brilliant sisters that are athletes out there, and we can't miss them in the discussion of what needs to be improved.
I agree. We still have 1 minute, so if you want to say anything else, you never told us how you got to Houston. So maybe maybe Danny can get him for part 2 someday, maybe next month or something, so we can figure out why he's in Houston, because his resume is just so strong.
Well, I want to shout out to the people that introduced me to Dr. Brown. You remember Arthur Mary Gilder, Arthur, Even a Man Can Have a Broken Heart?
Oh, of course.
Well, her daughter this is her boo.
Okay. All right.
That's my girlfriend.
Through Mara
That's your
and Tiara,
Okay,
I met
great.
Dr. Brown, and they told me so many amazing things. I said, send me his bio. And it started printing off the machine.
It was like
another
page
copy,
after page
another
after
copy,
page
another
after
copy. And the only thing I could see is, man, you know what? I could only see his blackness and the proudness that I was to say that, 1 out of 3 may end up in a situation like I am, but not all of us can be painted with a broad brush. You know what I'm saying? And I'm just proud of you making it to the top.
I'm being told to wrap up, so let me say thank you very much for coming and sharing your story with us. We hope we can get you back. We will give you a copy of the script, but thank you very much for watching the show. Thank you so much for being interested in Truth and Justice with Vivian King, where we try to educate you about the criminal justice community in Houston. Thank you. Good night.